In 1966, an aerospace engineer published a 57-page book that was so terrifying, the CIA immediately classified it. For over 50 years, they kept it locked away, releasing only sanitized portions to the public. The book wasn't about nuclear weapons or state secrets. It was about something far more terrifying. The end of our world happening in less than a single 24-hour period. And the most chilling part? Some of what this crazy engineer predicted may be coming true. We're diving into the classified catastrophe theory that the government doesn't want you to read. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the InBetween. With a rumble so low as to be inaudible, growing, throbbing, then fuming into a thundering roar, the earthquake starts. Well, it's not like any earthquake in recorded history. In California, the mountains shake like ferns in a breeze. The mighty Pacific rears back and piles up into a mountain of water more than 2 miles high, starting its race eastward. With the force of 1,000 armies, the wind attacks, ripping, shredding everything in its supersonic bombardment. The unbelievable mountain of Pacific seawater follows the wind eastward, burying Los Angeles and San Francisco as if they were but grains of sand. Nothing stops the relentless, overwhelming onslaught of wind and ocean. Across the continent, the 1,000-mile-per-hour wind wreaks its unholy vengeance everywhere, mercilessly, unceasingly. Every living thing is ripped into shreds while being blown across the countryside, and the earthquake leaves no place untouched. In many places, the Earth's molten sublayer breaks through and spreads a sea of white, hot liquid fire to add to the Holocaust. Within 3 hours, the fantastic wall of water moves across the continent, burying the wind-ravaged land under 2 miles of seething water coast to coast. In a fraction of a day, all vestiges of civilization are gone, and the great cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas, Detroit, are nothing but legends. Barely a stone is left where millions walked just a few hours before. I don't wake you up in the morning.
I don't wake you up in the morning, boy.
That is the description of our future, or possible future, by one Dr. Chauncey Powers Thomas, Chan for short, in his book, The Adam and Eve Story. And before you jump to the idea that this guy has a screw loose, just know that he's not some basement-dwelling conspiracy theorist. He passed away in 1998, but he was a legitimate electrical engineer who worked on classified projects at McDonnell Douglas and Bell Labs during the height of the Cold War. This was a man with security clearance, working on missile guidance systems and, according to some sources, UFO and anti-gravity research. Born in Missouri in 1920, Thomas was the kind of brilliant, eccentric mind that the aerospace industry seemed to attract during those wild years of the space race. He had the credentials to be taken seriously: electrical engineering degrees, patents, classified project experience, but he also had the kind of restless intellect that wouldn't stay in its lane. While other engineers were content to perfect radar systems and rocket guidance, Thomas was reading ancient flood myths, studying geological records, and asking uncomfortable questions about human history. Questions like, what if our civilization isn't the first? What if the Earth has a reset button? And what if someone is about to push it? So, what exactly is the good doctor talking about here? Well, let's start at the beginning. Dr. Thomas was an avid proponent of the work of a guy named Charles Hapgood, who in 1958 wrote a book called The Earth's Shifting Crust. Today, we take the theory of plate tectonics moving us around for granted. But that theory didn't become accepted science until the late 60s, partly because of Hapgood's research. And Hapgood was no slouch either. 2 of his books, including the one on the shifting crust, had forewords written by Albert Einstein. Thomas then took Hapgood's theory and fed it steroids. Here is his theory in a nutshell. The Earth's outer shell, consisting of the crust and upper mantle, approximately 60 miles thick, shifts periodically over its molten interior. The shell is typically stabilized by a thin layer within the upper mantle, located between 60 and 120 miles beneath the surface, which is usually relatively solid and stays that way most of the time because of the planet's magnetic field. However, every 6,000 to 7,000 years, neutral atomic matter leaks from the solid inner core into the surrounding liquid outer core. This influx is believed to cause a substantial atomic reaction resembling a controlled explosion within the planet, which temporarily neutralizes the magnetic field, kind of like an EMP. As a result, the usual solid layer under the crust liquefies entirely, transforming into a frictionless fluid akin to oil on a spinning top. This allows the two poles, which are heavier because of their significant ice buildups, to cause the shell to slip and rotate up to 90 degrees in a time frame as short as a quarter to half a day. So the poles end up at the equator, and the equator ends up at the poles. The consequences of the shift are catastrophic. As the shell moves, the oceans and atmosphere, governed by inertia, continue their eastward momentum at speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour relative to the shifting crust. This generates supersonic winds that erode the surface, while displaced waters create massive waves up to 2 miles high, flooding continents. It's like the tablecloth trick. The crust is the tablecloth, except in this instance, the dishes all break. The sudden movement fractures the crust, triggering earthquakes of immense magnitude and volcanic eruptions that release widespread lava flows. The chaos is estimated to go on for about 6 days, after which the shell stabilizes in a new orientation, potentially initiating a mini ice age, leaving primitive societies to start from scratch. Thomas's concept is totally in line with traditional plate tectonics. The only difference being that Hapgood's idea, the idea mainstream science has today, is that all of this happens over millennia. Thomas thinks it'll happen in an afternoon. I do have to point out, though, that Thomas's internal atomic trigger is totally a hypothesis on his part, but it kind of aligns with evidence of magnetic field reversals observed in geological records. According to Thomas, geological and fossil evidence suggests that the Earth's rock layers and fossil deposits show signs of rapid, catastrophic shifts rather than gradual, uniform changes. One prime example is the flash-frozen mammoths found in Siberian and Alaskan permafrost, such as the Berescova mammoth discovered in 1901, whose stomach contained undigested food and its mouth was full of buttercups and grass. This preservation indicates an abrupt, deep freeze, with temperatures possibly dropping to minus 150 Fahrenheit almost instantly while the animal grazed in a temperate environment. Similar muck pits across the northern hemisphere, from Alaska's Goldstream Valley to Siberia's Lena River, contain millions of tons of jumbled bones from mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, horses, and saber-toothed cats. These sites extend to Florida, New Jersey, and Texas, show no evidence of slow sedimentation. Instead, the animals appear mangled and buried violently. Uniform fine-grained mud deposits, hundreds of feet thick and consistent in composition, can be seen in sedimentary layers in the Grand Canyon, Arizona's Painted Desert, and South Dakota's Badlands. Thomas thinks these all stem from one giant global flood instead of millions of years of erosion. Ancient coral reefs have been found on the Atlantic seafloor at a depth of 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Keep in mind, coral doesn't usually go down past 300 feet. And jade, which usually forms 10 to 30 miles deep in the ground, deposited in Asian riverbeds, could indicate massive upheaval in the Earth's crust. Paleontological evidence includes sudden extinctions at the end of the Pleistocene, where 90% of large North American mammals disappeared without any clear evolutionary transitions, consistent with a catastrophic wipeout. Varv counts, which are counting the annual sediment layers in lakes in Sweden, Minnesota, and New Jersey, synchronize at about 11,500 years ago, meaning that all of these lakes were formed at the same time. Could be a coincidence, but it could also be the signature of some global event. Oceanographic data shows sea levels rebounded by 200 feet post-cataclysm as waters redistributed, while seismological patterns show fault line areas consistent with a crustal joyride. Although mainstream science attributes some of these findings to masses of animals just falling into bog pits or glacial melting, the convergence of data across stratigraphy, paleontography, oceanography, and seismology suggests worldwide instantaneous, cosmically speaking, catastrophes that challenge mainstream explanations. Cultural narratives in ancient texts are encoded memories of these cataclysmic events, preserved across generations. Hundreds of flood legends are documented worldwide, with a notable concentration in geologically sensitive regions like the Malay Peninsula, a potential pivot point for shell rotations. Indigenous Peruvian accounts describe the sun standing still for days, while Tierra del Fuego narratives call it setting in the wrong direction. Observations that could be interpreted as a way to explain the sun moving in a way that the sun had never moved before. Malayan Aborigines report a long night lasting weeks, and Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories depict a world overturned by water and fire. In the Old World, Greek, Egyptian, and Hindu epics reflect similar themes. Homer's Iliad references a great year of deluge, while Egyptian priests, as cited by Plato in Timaeus, warned of cyclic destructions every 9,000 years that erased advanced civilizations like Atlantis, dating to approximately 11,500 years ago. Check out our video on Atlantis to see that evidence. Link in the description. Archaeological evidence supports these interpretations. The Piri-Reis map from 1513 depicts an ice-free Antarctica, suggesting surveys from an intercataclysm warm period. Bolivia's Tiwanaku ruins, elevated 12,500 feet above sea level and 800 feet above Lake Titicaca, feature docks and port structures. So either the lake was way higher or that whole area got a whole lot higher. Linguistic similarities, such as shared roots between Mayan, Polynesian, Greek, and Eskimo languages, hint at cataclysm survivors being scattered to every corner of the globe. He even reinterprets the 6 days of creation in the book of Genesis as a metaphorical representation of Earth's recovery and renewal following a cataclysmic polar shift, rather than a literal creation event, with each day symbolizing a stage of post-shift stabilization. And amazingly enough, Dr. Thomas is not even the first guy to bring this up. A man named Georges Cuvier did. He was a French naturalist and zoologist in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and is often called the father of paleontology. He pioneered comparative anatomy, showing how species' structures reveal their functions, and established extinction as a scientific fact through fossil studies. He proposed sudden Earth revolutions, global-scale catastrophes like massive floods and upheavals as the direct causes of mass extinctions. You can imagine how that went over in 1800. But once Charles Hapgood broke the ice with his pre-plate tectonics crust-moving theory, the door was wide open for Dr. Chan to marry the two ideas into his catastrophic crust slippage theory. And according to this theory, based on his 6,500-year cycle from the last flood event, we're due right about now. So what is real here? Well, the theory he espoused was real, his book is real, and the fact that the CIA classified it is true. But there are plenty of caveats. So what exactly did the CIA classify? Well, along with a copy of Thomas's book, they locked away what appears to be a random collection of his personal effects, an inter-office memo, a shopping list for tools and car parts, and a folded article from People magazine. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I would not be surprised if the CIA already had a file on Dr. Thomas since he was working in some pretty sensitive projects. Why they found it prudent to save a copy of a People magazine article and a hardware store shopping list, I don't know. But remember, it was the height of the Cold War. People were still freaking out about how close we came to nuclear war just a couple of years earlier. So any kind of doomsday scenario was pretty popular. It was just a weird time in general, with people getting interested in fringe theories of any kind. And the CIA was paranoid about everything, mainly because they were the ones doing the really weird stuff. They were running mind control experiments, testing psychics for remote viewing, and investigating every possible threat to national security. So when Thomas published his book, the CIA got a copy for internal review, classified it, and stuck it in his file. Considering Hollywood was 50 years away from making disaster movies on this scale, maybe they thought a book describing the end of the world as we know it with this level of detail would freak people out even more. But public copies of the Adam and Eve story have circulated freely since its 1963-1965 editions, so it's not like the book itself was banned. Now, it is true that when they declassified their copy of the book in 2013, it was full of redactions. And help me if I'm missing something here, but I don't really understand why, considering it was available to the public anyway. One theory is that the CIA's copy came straight from Thomas with a little extra something information included that was not in the original printing. But I have a PDF of both the original 45-page edition and the CIA classified version, which is supposed to be redacted, but I see no redactions whatsoever. I haven't compared the two versions word for word, but it looks like they are identical, with the only exception being the actual page layout. Personally, I think the CIA was keeping an eye on him more because of the other things that he was involved in, like UFOs, than because of this book. But the big question we all should be asking, regardless of all of this cloak and dagger business, is he right? Well, he was about a few things. First, let's talk about those global flood myths. We've got them from every culture on Earth. The Bible's Noah, the Mesopotamian Gilgamesh epic, Mayan flood stories, Native American legends, Hindu Puranas, Greek myths about Deucalion. Everyone has the same tale of waters that wiped out previous civilizations. Thomas argued that these weren't myths, but memories. He said the last great flood happened around 6,500 years ago, not the Younger Dryas event 11,500 years ago. And guess what? In recent decades, archaeologists have found evidence of massive flooding events around exactly that time period. The Black Sea deluge, the breaching of the Mediterranean, evidence of the Great Flood mentioned in Chinese texts, all dating to around 6,500 to 7,000 years ago. Second, remember how mainstream science used to mock the idea of continental drift? The idea that the Earth's skin could slide around on top of the mantle? Thomas's mentor, Charles Hapgood, proposed that Earth's crust could shift position and was ridiculed for it. Well, guess what? Continental drift is now accepted fact. We know the continents have been wandering around for billions of years, forming supercontinents like Pangaea, breaking apart and reassembling over and over again. Third, he got the pole drift part right. Well, technically, I guess it's part of the continental drift, but his idea that areas like the Hudson Bay and the Sudan Basin were once located up at the North Pole is correct. Now, let's talk about those woolly mammoths. Am I the only one who wants to name them all Snuffleupagus? This point is really interesting to me. Personally, I don't think Thomas's claim is correct, but I don't think mainstream science is either. The specific mammoth that Dr. Thomas refers to as proof of his rapid cooling theory is the Beresovka snuffleupagus mammoth discovered along the Beresovka River way north in Siberia. It is a well-preserved full mammoth carcass, one of the very few to be found with a majority of its tissue intact. But not just tissue. It had blood in its veins and undigested buttercups in its stomach and mouth. Whatever happened to him happened so fast, he didn't even have time to chew. According to mainstream paleontology, they think he slipped on an embankment cave-in and was covered in a cold mudslide that then refrigerated him, eventually freezing him in place. Or, since he was found standing up, he was in a ravine and the mudslide covered him over. Whatever the case, we know that he was covered in mud. Not only because of the layering of the mud around him, but because he had mud in his lungs and had the telltale signs of dying of asphyxia. Our snuffleupagus weighed about 10,000 pounds, covered in mud that would act as insulation from outside temperatures, so it should have taken him weeks to even months to fully freeze. Think about how long it takes you to defrost your Thanksgiving turkey. And defrosting is faster than freezing. But the bacteria in his guts would have putrefied the food in his stomach long before it could freeze. So how is it possible for him to have food in his stomach? Dr. Thomas cites this as proof that a major freezing event had to have befallen poor Snuffy almost instantaneously, or maybe he was in the midst of it when he died. But even if the surface temperature suddenly dropped to the negative 150 degrees that Thomas says it would, is that enough to freeze Snuffy in hours versus weeks? I don't know. But it also means that the mainstream version that Snuffy died in a mudslide and froze in the ambient Siberian temperatures doesn't hold water either. The freezing action with the mud insulation would have taken too long for those buttercups to still be buttercups. Not to mention that the North Pole does not get nearly as cold as the South Pole. Temperatures at the North Pole don't drop below negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Minnesota gets colder than that in a good winter. So absent of some superstorm freezing event, ambient temperatures just couldn't freeze him fast enough. So is Thomas right or wrong on this one? I have no idea. But it seems like it would have to have taken some kind of extraordinary freezing event to freeze Snuffy with his buttercups. So maybe I do side with him on this one. That does not, however, mean I agree with this theory as a whole. And maybe it's true. I don't know. It's not like we've been around long enough to find out. But there's a crap ton of speculation happening here. In fact, from reading his book, it's easy to see how he often frames this whole catastrophic cycle as a spin cycle way of cleaning the earth. Yes, the cataclysm has done its work well. The greatest population regulator of all does once more for man what he refuses to do for himself and drives the pitiful few who survive into a new Stone Age. So part of me thinks he just came up with this whole thing as just a way to articulate his dream method of population control, an argument I take issue with. Fun fact, did you know you can fit all the 8 billion people of Earth onto the island of Maui? I think we have plenty of space. But whether his theory is true or not, I am good either way, because after a long chat with Grok, he assures me that the 2-mile-high wave will never make it to Minnesota. So we just have to survive the wind and hope we don't finally land at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so I may not agree with Dr. Thomas, but if you came here for a good dose of Armageddon today, I got you covered. Because we are far from being out of the woods yet. And I'm not talking about building-sized asteroids sailing through our atmosphere. I'm talking about a different danger coming from our very own Mother Earth, a magnetic pole shift. Our magnetic poles are moving fast and accelerating. In the 1990s, the North Pole drifted about 9 miles per year. By 2000, it was moving somewhere between 34 and 40 miles per year, depending on who you ask. Today, slowing a bit, but it's still at 22 miles per year. GPS systems that used to be updated every 5 years now need updates every 6 months. Flight paths have to be constantly recalculated. Compasses are becoming unreliable in many parts of the world. Worse yet, the Earth's magnetic field is weakening, down about 10% in the last 150 years, with some regions showing losses of 15% or more. In the South Atlantic, there's an area called the South Atlantic Anomaly, where the magnetic field is so weak that satellites regularly malfunction when they pass over it. Scientists now openly discuss the possibility of a magnetic pole reversal, where north becomes south and south becomes north, something that allegedly happens on average every 320,000 years. Some scientists say the last one was 780,000 years ago, which would mean we are way overdue. Others believe we might already be in the early stages of a reversal. But before you start digging that bunker, just know that 320,000 is only an average of the number of flips we've had in the last 83 million years. But these flips vary by an insane amount. Before this 83 million year period, we went 40 million years without one. So who's to say we won't go another 20 million years before we flip it again? But even if that were the case, that does not mean we may not have trouble on the horizon. Now let's be clear. A magnetic pole shift wouldn't cause Thomas's catastrophic crustal displacement, but it would leave us vulnerable in ways that would make his apocalyptic vision seem quaint by comparison. Without our magnetic field, every solar storm becomes a potential civilization ender. Our satellites would fry, GPS would fail, power grids would collapse, the internet would go dark. We'd be thrown back to the Stone Age, not by crustal displacement, but by our own technology turning against us. And we've already seen previews of this. The 1859 Carrington event was a massive solar storm that knocked out telegraph lines worldwide. Telegraph operators received electric shocks. Telegraph poles caught fire, and some telegraph systems continued to work even after being disconnected from their power sources. They were being powered by the electrical currents induced by the magnetic storm. If a Carrington-level event happened today, estimates suggest it would cause $1 to $2 trillion in damage and take 4 to 10 years to fully recover from. And that's with our magnetic field mostly intact. Without any field, a moderate solar storm could end modern civilization. And the Earth has already had times outside of these full reversal flips where the magnetic field has gone seriously wonky. These are called excursions, a nice vacation-y sounding word for trouble without a full flip. 41,000 years ago was the Lachamp excursion, when the magnetic field dropped 90 to 95% and lasted 2,000 years. 33,000 years ago was the Mono Lake excursion, where the field dropped at least 75%. Now, if we did have a full magnetic field reversal, the field typically does not fall to zero, but the whole process takes thousands of years. That's a lot of extra sunscreen to protect ourselves from those extra cosmic rays. But to make you feel a little bit better, just think of how spectacular the northern and southern lights will be. Now, I know that all of this information sounds really scary, but relax. The Earth's crust is always moving, the climate is always shifting, and life always finds a way. Ooh, that kind of gets your heart rate up a bit, doesn't it? I don't know about you, but I feel like I need to buy a shovel and get my bunker started. But if you'd rather stay right here and learn more about your universe that maybe you didn't know, click right here. It'll do the job, I promise. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.